Hey, I'm Mark Ostach, and I just first wanted to start by saying congratulations on 100 years. That is quite a milestone to accomplish. Super excited for you. Let's get some confetti rolling for your 100th year anniversary. I'm honored to be able to be joining you to cover your 2Q partnership pillar as I speak about ways that we can better connect in the workplace and the communities in which we build in to help strengthen partnerships, practice the art of listening, and just gain better understanding of one another. I know you heard from Ryan Leak last quarter on what it means to practice excellence or a commitment to excellence. Not only is he an excellent speaker and a friend, but I think it's an excellent transition to this idea of taking a commitment to the partnerships that we hold with our employees, with our partners, and with our customers. And I just want to say that your industry has a special place in my heart as I grew up in a home, a blue collar home in the Midwest here in Metro Detroit. And my dad is in the business of heating and cooling. So he started his career as a sheet metal worker, working in Detroit, and eventually made his way into the back office. You can see that he loves blueprints and mechanical pencils because he's always making sure the estimates he gives his clients are accurate. And I'm just honored to be able to share a piece of his career with you all as we honor 100 years together. So today we're going to cover various topics, two central themes on this idea how we can model courage in the way in which we connect. So whether you're a warehouse worker, a delivery driver, a manufacturing associate, or work in the office or a number of the other skills and positions that make up the organization, I promise you the principles that I'll teach today will allow you to strengthen the partnerships that you hold and probably find a little bit more joy vocationally in just the day-to-day of life. So let's start with a little bit of a story. I really think that part of our heart here is to create more meaningful connections. And for me, I get a chance to travel all throughout the country, sometimes 30 to 40 times a year. And whenever I come home from a trip, my wife always says, "Who did you meet on the airplane today?" Well, this particular trip, I was heading from Detroit to Mississippi on a direct flight, and I sat next to a gentleman by the name of John. Now, John, like myself, was a sole business owner, but his business was in the construction space. And after many years and even decades of a successful home building business, John had found himself, this is nearly 25 years ago that he's expressing this memory that he held of a season where he was literally out of work. And as the story goes on, he found himself with 3 young boys at home and they were out of food. His wife calls him one day and said, "John, did you get that kitchen remodel that you were hoping for?" And he said, "Honey, I didn't." And as John's beginning to reminisce of this season 25 years ago, I know he has an extra desire to teach me a lesson in his wisdom, as he knows that I'm kind of on the front end of my fatherhood and entrepreneurial endeavors. So I felt like this story was meant for me even before I knew where the story was going. So let me continue on with you. As John expresses, he comes home, no money, no food, and his wife says, "John, what are we going to do? Saturday morning is when we cook pancakes for the boys, and the boys are going to be hungry. They're 8 years old, 6 years old, and 4 years old." He said, "Let's head to bed, and we'll figure it out in the morning." In the morning, John wakes up before the kids, pours a cup of coffee, goes into the garage just to pray and putz around because he's not quite sure what he's going to do for food, let alone for work. And in the garage in the early morning on a Saturday, John finds himself being greeted by his neighbor who lived across the street, who came over just to say, "Hey, John, how you doing? Happy Saturday morning." And as they began to discuss kind of the weekend plans, the neighbor said, "Hey, John, I don't know if you know this, but my wife and I, we're moving out today. It's been 18 years in the community, fantastic living by you the whole time. However, it's time to go south to Florida. And we just wanted to say your family's been fantastic to live next to. Good luck." And just wanted to say goodbye before we pressed out. With the moving van idling in the driveway, John, who's distracted from his need for food and money, shakes the neighbor's hand kind of half-heartedly, says, "Good luck to you." And his neighbor goes to walk back across the street. And as soon as he gets to the edge of his driveway, he turns around and he says, "Hey, John, I forgot to mention, we have 2 weeks worth of groceries in the fridge and they're going to spoil and we can't take them with us. Do you guys need them?" And as John's telling me the story on an airplane and 30,000 feet up in the air, he begins to cry right there, recalling this memory from 25 years ago. John looks at his neighbor and says, yeah, we need the groceries. He woke his boys up. He said, boys, get out of bed, grab some coolers, and get your butts across the street to get some food to put in our fridge. His boys were never the wiser that they didn't have food that weekend. And thankfully, John's vocational kind of endeavors turned himself around and business picked back up. And I shared that story for two reasons. One, because it's a great testimony on what happens when we rely on our neighbors. And I think metaphorically, our neighbors oftentimes are the people we work with, the partners we have, and the homes that we get a chance to do work in. So I want to use this idea of a neighbor and transition into an exercise called Hello Neighbor. Now, the way that this works is I'm going to share a statement, and if you agree with the statement, you simply say hello neighbor. So as you tune in, whether in the chat box or whether just in your own internal dialogue, play along, because I know there's thousands of you listening to this message today, and I'd wager that a lot of you have more in common than you know. So let's try this out for size. I prefer coffee over tea. Hello neighbor. I can hear many of you with your cup of coffee in hand saying, that's me, I prefer coffee over tea. All right, let's try a few more. I prefer dogs over cats. Okay, I'm sensing a few cat people in the audience looking at me, giving me kind of a little bit of an eye of judgment here. So for those folks, I prefer cats over dogs. Or who knows, maybe I prefer no animals at all. Let me try a few more deeper ones, if you will. I grew up in a home with divorced parents. Hello neighbor, for those that can connect with that. I grew up in a home that had alcoholism in it. And I'll try one more to see the other neighbors out here. I believe the Detroit Lions are going to win the Super Bowl in 2026. Hello neighbor. Now I hope I made a few friends along the way, but I have to stick to my Detroit Lions roots. So whether you like them or love them, that's beyond the point. I hope that you saw in this exercise that there's actually more in common than we hold than just our job titles or how many years we worked at the organization. And I think that's the heart of what I want to teach you today is how can we create more meaningful connections and how can we use courage as a conduit to get there? Now, as I mentioned before, I traveled all throughout the country speaking on the idea of meaningful connections create beautiful partnerships, and those beautiful partnerships create sustainable organizations. And you all know that as you're celebrating this 100th year milestone. Aside from my professional kind of accomplishments, what's most near and dear to my heart is my personal accomplishments. I have married for 13 years. I have 2 kids, 3 dogs, and 1 bunny. Please don't ask how or why the dogs and the bunnies outnumber or at least equally match the humans in our home. But they truly are the reason for the work that I get to do. And I've learned so many lessons as both a parent, as a husband, and as a father that I think blend themselves into the organizational experiences I've had. And I believe that you all are one great big family. And when we have the opportunity to learn to listen to each other, we oftentimes can get more understanding and seek clarity in what it is people are trying to say and express. And I believe truly the art of listening is a gift to connection. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Oftentimes that's a significant sign of maybe listening more than talking less. It's hard to do, but oftentimes when we find ourselves listening from a place of what are they saying, what am I sensing, and what am I feeling, it often allows us to understand what are they thinking. It's also known as your EQ, your IQ, and your BQ. Your body intelligence, what is my body showing? My EQ, my emotional intelligence, and my IQ, my intellectual intelligence. But all that aside, I think the beauty of connecting comes in many different forms and sizes. And I want to look at the root word of connection, which means con. In its earliest definition, con is a Latin word that means unity or be together. So as we think about connecting with our employees and our partners in the field and outside of the field, we see that we have a chance to be unified in how we connect. So as we begin to do that, I want to introduce what I think the number one distraction to fostering meaningful connections is. Can you guess what the number one distraction for fostering meaningful connections? Will you throw me my phone there? Let me guess. Spoiler alert. It's the phone. I tell you, these digital devices are a huge gift, but they oftentimes can find ourselves being doubly distracted and equally distracted as we're trying to maintain our connection to one another and let alone listen to each other. So I like to often invite the idea if your phone allows you to connect with those outside of you, how do you use your heart to connect with those right in front of you? And when we look down at our phones, we find ourselves staring at our screens. I like to say our eyes are the gateway to our soul, and our forehead, well, it's the gateway to our forehead. So as we begin to process more with our IQ, EQ, or BQ on how we connect, I just want to encourage you that use these devices as tools. Don't let them tempt you from distracting yourself from the person that's right in front of you. One last statistic for you to consider. We spend literally 4.5 hours on our phones outside of the workplace. So that means our free time, our recreational time. Did you know that if our fingers were on a treadmill, we would travel 5 miles of distance a day? Now, I share that because I believe one of the best ways that we can stay healthy in our physical and emotional state that allows us to better connect is to walk. So if you have the ability to move your body or walk more, I'm always encouraging people, when you're feeling disconnected and you need to get outside and take a break, I want to encourage you to walk. So in order to do that, for those that have the ability to get some fresh air, whether you can walk or whether you just want to be able to move your body outside, that allows you to better connect and physically take a break or mentally take a break from what's disturbing you and physically get into your own body. Now, I just want to share up 5 ways that you can consider improving your digital wellness, because I believe the direct correlation to our digital health impacts our physical health and the way in which we connect socially. So if you look at your digital calories as something that you consume, then you can consider sometimes we consume high saturated, digitally bloated news headlines or social media feeds that make us feel kind of digitally bloated. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining a balance between our analog and digital life. So I want to offer up a couple ways that you can consider improving your digital wellness. First and foremost, take a digital fast 1 hour a day. Make eye contact when talking. We've talked about how that impacts our ability to listen and to better understand. You could maybe go to bed 1 hour without technology and see how much better you can sleep throughout the night. Or you could go phone free with your meals, or a number of other things that allow you just to make sure that you're connecting with those that are right in front of you. Lastly, I just want to share that when you're feeling overwhelmed, and a lot of research and statistics show that there's so many digital demands and physical demands to our day, whether we're in the field or in the office, that sometimes make us just feel anxious and overwhelmed. 2 of the dangers of becoming disconnected. So I want to give you an acronym called HALT. And HALT stands for, am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? If you can say yes to one or more of those things, stop, which is the German word for halt, and reset. Grab a snack, express your anger or frustration. If you're lonely, phone a friend, call a coworker, and if you're tired, see if you can just maybe rest your eyes or your mind for a minute. In the busyness of the day-to-day, I want to teach you a technique called conscious breathing. And conscious breathing is often taught in school systems where they're trying to encourage the students who are socially, emotionally upset to calm themselves and go from their upstairs brain, fear and flight and frustration, to their downstairs brain, calming, collaboration, and just a sense of peace. So here they are, in no particular order. There's the star breath. You breathe in like a star and breathe out. There's the balloon. You breathe in and you breathe back out. There's the faucets for maybe when you're frustrated, the hot and the cold. You breathe in and you let the water flow as you breathe out. And lastly, and I saved it for last because it's the hardest, but it's the pretzel. You turn your arms, you breathe in, and you unwind yourself. Now, those techniques allow your brain and your breath to align and to calm yourself down so you can better connect with what's going on. They originally were intended for maybe a youth-filled audience in schools, but I promise you that as adults, our breath works the same way. So as you consider ways that you're continuing to encourage healthy connections, just know that brain breaks using our breath are a great way to get there. One other thing that I wanted to offer up to you is what's called a turn down technique. When we are overwhelmed, when we're feeling anxious or stressed, we're less likely to be present-minded. We are half listening. And when we're half listening, sometimes the information that somebody's telling us goes in one ear and out the other. So one of the things that we can do is called a turn down technique. And if you can remember the movie Back to the Future, and you can picture Marty McFly going into the opening scene of Back to the Future 1, and he's turning up all of the volume knobs in Doc's lab, and he grabs that guitar, and he takes that shiny guitar pick, and he hammers down on the strings, and the guitar reverberates, and the sound just blasts him back into the bookshelf, and he finds himself on his derriere. Now, I believe that the way that our thoughts function when we're overwhelmed is similar to the volume of that speaker that blasted Marty McFly back to the bookshelf. So turn-down techniques allow you to focus on moving your body, moving your mind, and doing it in a little bit of fashion. A little bit of time, I should say. So whether you have just a quick 5-minute break in between jobs, or whether you're in the van or the truck and you feel like you just need to kind of reset, a turn-down technique would allow you to do that. And they include things like walking, writing down lists, phoning a friend, having a cup of coffee, writing in a journal, making a to-do list, just putting on your favorite playlist in your vehicle and listening to music that lifts you up. These things are physical, fast, easy, flexible, fun, and free, and they allow you to turn down the volume so you can better listen and reset. Lastly, before we move into this idea of courage, I think that one of the things that people ask me throughout my travels is, Mark, if there is one piece of advice that you could give us on how to create more meaningful connections with people we work with and live with, what would it be? And for a while, I had an answer that's no longer the answer I hold. And the answer I hold is when you're more connected with yourself, you're more likely to connect with those around you. And you can sense there's an undertone of emotional, physical, and even spiritual wellness that I speak when I say connect with yourself. And I'm going to introduce a fun fact here, but sheep are made up of 80% water. And I learned this from my friend who owns a farm and who has a lot of sheep. And he told me that sheep can go 2 months without living near a source of water. So no river, no brook, no stream, nothing. How, if they're mostly water, 80%, can they go 2 months without any water? Any guesses? That's what I thought too. But the actual answer is the morning dew. On the grass each morning, whether it's the hottest day in the summer or the coldest day in the winter, the sheep rise before the sun opens up the day, and they go out to the grass, and the grass is covered with dew, and they eat their lion's share of grass, sustaining them, connecting them to food and to water that sustains them through the hottest days or the coldest nights. So I want to encourage you, in the early morning, can you find your morning dew? What are the practices and techniques and things that you do that fill you up? Now, by the way, I'm not borrowing language from Mountain Dew's Do the Do. I don't suggest you drink Mountain Dew the first thing you do when you wake up. But I guess in some regards, it's no different than the cup of coffee I have each morning upon arising. But for me, I sit here in my office and I do my gratitude notebook and I read texts and devotionals and things that work for me. And I'd encourage you to find things that work for you. Find your do and do not jeopardize that time, even if it's 5 minutes in the morning. All right, we've covered a lot on connection. I want to turn the corner now and talk about this idea of courage, because I believe that courage is a conduit to better connect. So in the spirit of building partnerships and healthy relationships, we want to make sure that sometimes we're using courage as a way to do that. Now, before I move into that, I think one of the things that people ask me is that, hey, it's hard to connect with certain people. I would argue that you need a little bit of courage oftentimes to do so. So I want to offer up 3 questions that you can ask, whether it's a new hire, whether it's a partner, whether it's somebody that you've met within the workplace that you just want to get to know better, but maybe there's a generational gap in your knowing of each other, or maybe you don't feel like you want to talk about the news and the weather one more day. These 3 questions go back to the basics, and they are, how are you? Pausing and sincerely listening to them respond. What are you looking forward to or feeling hopeful about? And then lastly, how can I help you? When we change the narrative on the dialogues that we direct to the people that are in front of us, we afford them the chance to share, what are they looking forward to? What are they feeling hopeful about? And those questions often introduce things that bring them energy, you energy, and before you know it, there's enthusiasm and a sense of renewal to that time together. Sometimes it takes courage to ask somebody those things. Sometimes your natural personality allows you just to do that. So those are more some basic techniques to begin fostering courage in the way that which you connect. Now, truthfully, some people, when you ask them how they're doing, they simply just say fine. And if you have a teenager or know a teenager, that is the teenager's most popular choice in their vocabulary is the word fine. So in some cultures, instead of asking the pleasantries of how are you or what's up, they actually ask the question, what is the state of your heart? Now, I don't expect you to begin asking that question to one another, but I do believe that it gets to a larger point, which directly reflects to courage. And the core word of courage is core. And that original intention meant heart, or to share your heart and tell your story. So as we move into another exercise, this one is called If You Really Knew Me. And if you really knew me is a statement that allows you to model vulnerability in a way that shares a little bit more about yourself beyond your job title or your tenure or how long you've been in the business for. So let me model this for you. I'm going to share a few different kind of ranges of statements. And if you think of vulnerability as a spice, it can be anywhere from mild to medium to spicy. Now, this is kind of a fast track way to get to know each other better. So let me just model it out and you'll get the idea for it. All right, here we go. If you really knew me, you would know that I do have a brother with special needs. If you really knew me, you would know that my brother will have to live with a guardian when my parents pass away. And if you really knew me, you'd know that I am that guardian. If you really knew me, you know that we just celebrated my dad's 70th birthday this summer. And although he's still working in the industry, his mental and physical health has becoming deteriorated. And if you really knew me, you'd know that whenever he calls me, there's an extra level of anxiety, making sure that he's okay. If you really knew me, you'd know that I love music. Music is my turn down technique. I love classical rock music. I love classical music. I love all sorts of music. But if you really, really, really knew me, you would know that my #1 artist on Spotify is Kenny G. Please don't judge me. The saxophone player, Kenny G. And lastly, if you really knew me, you would know that I really hope that today's message and this exercise is demonstrating my heart for you and my desire for you to share your hearts with one another. So you can give me some snaps and claps, because that's what you'd want to do if you're doing this in a one-on-one or a group setting, or maybe even around the dinner table with your friends and family. My challenge to you is, when you model courage or even vulnerability that's not forced but authentic, you find things about each other that allow you to stand on the same ground that you didn't realize you stood on. So speaking of standing on ground that I hope maybe one or two of you stand on together, I want to tell you a story about Kenny G. So a few years ago, in order to understand my love for Kenny G, you need to understand my love for my father. Now, I grew up a child of the 80s, and as you can see in this picture, this was 1982. I just got done cutting the grass with my dad, and we found ourselves doing chores on a Sunday. We'd go to church, go to breakfast, cut the grass like clockwork. And in this picture, I can feel myself feeling the heat on his back. I can smell the gasoline in the engine, and if I close my eyes long enough, I can see his grass-stained shoes that once were white. Now, we proceeded to do chores as I grew to a young man in middle school and high school, and we would listen to Kenny G on the 6-disc CD player that would spin around, if you remember those, 6-disc CD player, and we'd play Kenny G's Breathless album and use triple the amount of Windex required to wash the windows. Fast forward, 5 years ago, my dad and I had a chance to see Kenny G live in concert. Now, I kid you not, it was incredible, and it was extra incredible because 2 months before the concert, my dad was in the hospital on his deathbed. Thankfully, he got out of the hospital, made his way back into recovery, and now has since walked with a cane. So as we're in the concert, walking to our seats, he's moving slower with his cane. We get down to our seat. It's a 10,000 person amphitheater. It's a beautiful place to catch a concert in Detroit. And we were in the 10th row center. However, we were like 30 people down the center aisle. So instead of knocking down the beer and the popcorn and the pop, we decided to sit in the aisleway, which were not our seats. As we're sitting, the music's beginning to starting, the light is beginning to turn on. Kenny G's saxophone begins to just ruminate throughout the entire arena, but we can't see him on stage. Perplexed by what's going on, the ticket holders whose seats we're in say, "Get out of our seats." So my dad and I, we look at each other, and instead of going to our actual seats, we take a step back to the 11th row, which happened to also be open so he could sit in the aisleway and extend his legs. Now, what happened next is absolutely incredible because the bass player hops off the stage, walks down the center aisle, puts a crate right in front of my dad, touches him on the leg, and says, "You have the best seat in the venue." And what happens next is absolutely incredible. Now, I know this story was really, really emotionally provoking. How many of you felt hope or joy in this story? How many of you felt sadness missing a loved one? And lastly, how many of you are taking a day off of work next month to go to the Kenny G concert with me in Toronto? I hope I've converted a couple Kenny G fans in this last story. But the truth is that no matter where you connected emotionally in that story, I want to teach you an emotional acronym called RAIN. And RAIN stands for, can I recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture what it is that I'm feeling while I'm feeling it. So whether you get rained out on a job site, whether you have a change in a work order that shifts your schedule around, or whether you simply get that email that you flag out of frustration because you don't have the capacity to respond at the moment. Each one of those particular situations allows you to practice RAIN and recognize the emotions that you're feeling. Maybe it's anger or frustration in your heart or in your neck. Maybe it's in your stomach or your back, but allow it to be there. Our emotions take 90 seconds to metabolize if we can let them metabolize. And once they've gone through us, we can investigate where they went and how they're being released and nurture ourselves or that person or people with compassion. So here's another turn down technique where we can kind of practice RAIN, if you will, by moving our emotions. And this is called 5 seconds of energy freedom. Now, I'm going to count us down from 3. And when I get to 1, you all have 5 seconds to jump up and down, hoot, holler. If you're in the office, high five somebody. For those of you that want to run around, by all means, whatever you need to do to move your emotions, as the word says, our emotions are just energy in motion. So when we're stuck and stagnant and not connecting and not listening, we need to move our emotions. So here we go. If we don't do this right, we're going to do this again. So I want to make sure that everybody participates. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. Yeah. Run in place, do what you got to do, move your body, stretch your neck, and 5 seconds is up, bringing it back to me. As we continue on in today's discussion, I just have one more piece of core content that I want to share with you that hopefully will allow you to practice this partnership of connecting and continue to give you encouragement as you celebrate the 100 years together. And in the book, The Gift of Influence says, at the end of your life, in theory, you'll have filled an entire stadium of 80,000 people that will said, you had a positive influence on me. So the people that you meet at the job sites, the person at the grocery store that you let go in front of you because you can tell he or she is busier and has a place to be more than you are, or just the pay it forward moment that you've experienced in your life. Each one of those people, 80,000, the average life would say, hey, you've had an influence on me. And I believe that one of the ways that we have an influence on each other is to speak life over one another. And the way that this story is told, if you can picture 1952 in a middle school in the South with no air conditioning. Now, I know it's hard to think of how did they not know about your wonderful products and services back in 1952, but many schools couldn't afford central AC in that decade. So there's a teacher, we'll call her Mrs. Thomas. And Mrs. Thomas had one math test to give before letting all of her students out for spring break. And as you could tell, in the South, really hot, nobody was paying attention. They didn't want to take the test. So Mrs. Thomas went over to the blackboard, smacked the blackboard, and said, listen up. Everybody gets a passing grade on the math test. However, before you leave for spring break, you need to pull out a sheet of paper, sharpen your pencil, and I sit down quietly and look around the room. And I want you to write down a statement that's life-giving to each of your 18 classmates on a single sheet of paper. So one by one, the students began writing individual statements about all 18 classmates, saying something nice, uplifting, or positive about them. They all turned them in, went for spring break, and Mrs. Thomas, who should have taken a week off of school just like the rest of her staff, instead, she took each individual response and created a new list of the 18 things said about you, and you, and you, and you. And before you know it, she had 18 new sheets to turn in to her classmates upon return from spring break. So one by one, these middle schoolers walked in and she passed out these sheets of paper and she watched as tears flowed, as emotions began to smile and embarrassment in the cheeks and the ears begin to get red. Watching each student look around the classroom said, you said that about me? You think this about me? You see this in me? It was a moment that Mrs. Thomas will always remember. And 10 years later, she had a chance to revisit that memory. Those students went on to go to high school. Some graduated, some got into the trades, some became mechanical contractors, some went off to the war. And those that went off to the war, one of those students became a fallen soldier in the line of duty. So Mrs. Thomas had a chance to go to his funeral at the young age of 19. In the 50s, or in this time in the early 60s, she's in a house back when you'd have the funerals in the home, and she went to pay her respects, and the parents identified her and remembered her as Mrs. Thomas, the middle school teacher. And they pulled her aside, went into the son's room and said, Mrs. Thomas, it's been so long. Our son absolutely loved you. We want to show you something. So they walked over to their son, their late son's bedroom, and on his bed laid an American flag. And on top of the folded American flag, there was a hard hat. And the dad flipped open the hard hat, flipped over the hard hat, tucked in the lining of the hard hat. He pulled out a sheet of paper and he unfolded it, and it was old and tatted and sweaty. But once he got it completely unfolded, he said, Mrs. Thomas, these are the 18 statements that students spoke about him nearly a decade ago. He's carried it in his wallet. He's carried it in his backpack when he left the house. And he carried it in the line of duty because he knew the things that were spoken over him impacted his identity, his worth, and the way he walked in the world just from that little exercise. So I want to offer that story to you, not to wait for an excuse or a reason or a one-on-one or a feedback session to speak affirming truths over the people that you work with. Not only will it strengthen partnerships, but it'll strengthen humanity. I'll end with one final story that allows me to express somebody who had one of those positive influences on the way they connected with our life. My family and I, a few years back, were heading on our first ski weekend together. Now, truthfully, Dad was the only one that had skied, but I trusted that if I could get the kids on skis early, they'd be okay. And my wife, well, she was up for the challenge. Thankfully, nobody got injured, and we had a great weekend together, lots of hot chocolates. And on our way back, I packed up the minivan full of boots and bags and all our belongings. And I realized that this was a successful trip. And I began thinking about that as we drove home 4 hours. As we headed south halfway through our trip, I hear my daughter, and at the time, who was nearly 4 years old, from the back said, "Hey, Dad, do you know where my pink stuffed animal unicorn is?" And I thought, I've packed everything. I don't know where your pink stuffed animal unicorn is. She begins to cry. My wife begins to encourage me to turn the car back around. That wasn't happening. So instead, I called the resort and I got transferred to a woman named Penny. Now, Penny works in the Lost and Found department. She's actually worked there for 18 years, the same position, helping people find all of their belongings. I picture the Lost and Found department being this gigantic department of sunglasses and left-handed gloves and boots and a whole bunch of wallets with no cash in them. And Penny directed my call and eased my mind, saying, "Mr. Ostach, we will search all 500 rooms at this resort to find your pink stuffed animal unicorn." It almost felt as if she brought in a sketch artist to take a make and model of the pink unicorn. Now, a week went by and no unicorn. 2 weeks go by, nothing. 1 month goes by, I give Penny one call of desperation saying, "My daughter's still having trouble sleeping. By chance, did you find the unicorn?" And she said, "Mr. Ostach, I am so sorry. Your unicorn is gone." 2 months go by, and it's no longer winter in the Midwest. And in Michigan, when it's 45 degrees, we put shorts and a t-shirt on. So it was beginning to feel like spring. And all of a sudden, the doorbell rang, and a package got dropped off. And on the package, it said Boyne Resorts, the place in which we took our ski trip a few months ago. I opened the package, and in the package, I find this little note. And the note said, "Dear Mila, thank you for letting me stay at Boyne a few extra days. I rode the chairlift. It was fun. So was the water park. I was ready to come home." And the rest of the box was the pink unicorn. I gave it to Mila. She rejoiced knowing that her pink unicorn and her were reunited after a long lost journey. It turns out that Penny found the unicorn in the laundry services. I promise you that is the cleanest unicorn on the planet Earth. Now, 2 things came to my mind after delivering that gift to my daughter. One of them was, how did Penny remember her name? And the second thing was, did Penny ask for permission to spend $12 on that package to send to my family? Now, I really think that many of you have a little bit of Penny inside of you. You have the ability to use the way you're naturally shaped and made, regardless if this is your first year or your 50th year at the organization. You have a chance to positively connect with those that you get to work with, do life with, and the partners that you see in the line of business. And I assure you that if you can remember some of these stories and techniques, not only will you make a difference, but you'll probably, as I like to say, make a dent where you are sent. I can't thank you enough for all of your time and experiences today, just allowing me to just encourage you on the partnership and the pillar of connection. Everybody's going to have a chance to get a digital download of my book, Courage to Connect, that shares other meaningful stories on how you can connect in the workplace and in your community. And I can't thank you enough for allowing me to be here today. I always like to say human connection is the most powerful connection you have. I hope you saw that and felt that today. Thank you so much for allowing me to help you celebrate 100 years of business, and congratulations.